Good evening. Well, I messed up. Have you ever messed up and had to be surprised with doing something you did not intend to do? Has that ever happened in your life? Not class, not class. Rhetorical questions. I thought that Theo was preaching this evening, and I forgot he told me he would not be here this evening. And I thought after last Sunday afternoon, having that whole afternoon, because I didn't have to preach that Sunday, that, I'm gonna go hang out at Barrows and have pizza. That's what I'm gonna do this afternoon. And then when I get home, I'm gonna lay down, and I'm not gonna do anything. And that's what I did. It was very fulfilling. I see what everyone likes about it. And then I got here, and I was a little worried. I had texted Theo, but I didn't hear back from him. And so Mick called him, and I'm glad he did, and found out that he would not be here. So I had about 15, 20 minutes to get ready, and I had a lesson I was getting ready for Sunday evening next week. So I had that right here. And I was going to do it. I went over it, told my kids, leave me alone, get out of here. Mick will take care of you, and I will work. I'm going to go over these things, but, I think I want to talk about surprises. And to make Lane happy, he was wanting a 10-minute lesson. It might be 10 minutes. Could be 45, depending on how much I enjoy it. But surprises. We like surprises. Sometimes they're good, but sometimes they're bad, aren't they? And when they're good, we're up and we're happy and we're excited about it. But when they're bad, we begin to wonder. Sometimes we question. I've seen others blame God. But it all depends on how you look at it and how you approach it and why is it there. This morning in the book of Daniel, we were looking at that in our class, and Nebuchadnezzar was hit with a surprise, right? When he went out there in Daniel chapter 4 on his patio and said, look at all that I have done. And that while the words were in his mouth, the hammer dropped. What a surprise that must have been. How great the day was going. He was at ease and flourishing in his house. And then the very next hour, he was losing his sense of reason. He was eating grass and out there acting like an animal. Paul had quite the surprise on the road to Damascus, didn't he? That the whole direction he was taking his life was the wrong one, and that everything was turned upside down, and he's going to have to change course. And he knew it, but he made the right choice. Joseph and Mary, they had a pretty big surprise. One day when Joseph came home, found out, what's that, Mary? You're pregnant? How did that happen? What a surprise. And so he was going to put her away, but do it secretly. And then the angel Gabriel came to him and let him know that she was with child because of the Holy Spirit, that his name would be Jesus. What a surprise. But that surprise turned out to create a lot of difficulties for them in their life, especially for Mary. How difficult it must have been for her to watch the nation as she knew that she had a special child, that God was blessing, and then find out that later on this was the Messiah, and then watch her own people turn their back on him and put him on the cross. Surprises. There are many of them in the Bible. Some good, many bad. How do you handle them, and why are they there? They're there, as we see throughout the Bible, to get your attention. We were talking about that this morning, to goad and prod us and to move in the right direction, or a lot of times to build up that character, or in the case of Job, to show his faith. His wife didn't like seeing it, and his friends didn't understand it, but Job never wavered, did he? You think it was a surprise for Daniel when everything was falling apart at the city of Jerusalem as Nebuchadnezzar came and took them and began to take people off into captivity, him and his friends as well? But I have been a good a good Jew. I followed the law. I have loved and had mercy on the poor. I've done everything right. Why take me, Lord? Why not those other people? You know that song we sing? You know, I can't remember how it goes, but that a song where it talks about where we look around at all those who do evil and wicked in the world, they seem to be doing well. And yet our lives are miserable. Why? We're growing in our character, aren't we? God puts things in our lives that produces what needs to be produced in us to grow up in the maturity of Christ. One of my favorite things I learned from Sunset was by Charles Spear. It's amazing how when memories will pop in your mind and it recreates, or not recreates, but brings back new memories. I've been trying to think of Charles Spear's name for weeks. And just as I remembered this illustration, his name popped in my head. Charles Spear. He was a teacher at Sunset. And he had this illustration talking about maturity and all the different things that we need to have in our life as Christians. He had this slide of a bucket that was made with planks of wood, and it had the bands of metal around it. But all the planks that were making up this bucket or barrel, some of them were tall and long, some of them were real short with names on them. You know, mercy and grace and all these things all the way around. But some of them that were real small are things the person obviously had not been working on. And he asked, if you poured water into the barrel, how much water will it hold? As much as the shortest plank, right? Didn't matter how good you were all the way around here, this one over here, you were lacking. And you weren't maturing and growing up into the likeness of Christ. And we all have that, don't we? We have those places in our lives where we're lacking in certain things that we need to reflect Christ, to be like him. And it can be difficult. It's a struggle. And all these surprises that we have in our life. You know, turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and look at the first few verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 5. That's a hard one to find. It's kind of small. It's right at the end of Proverbs. If you're struggling to find that one. In my Bible, it's page 941, my new Bible. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, starting in verse 1, Solomon writes, "Guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. For they do not know they are doing evil. Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God, for God is in heaven, and you are on the earth. Therefore let your words be few. Do not be hasty in the words you use." How many times have we wondered, God, are you punishing me? Why is this happening? Or as many do, they blame God for the hardships they're facing. Does God want us to have to go through difficulties in this life? He does not. He doesn't want that for us. He never wanted that for us. We brought these things upon ourselves. And when there's sin in our lives, or when there's sin around us, he may put us in a situation, but that may not be the situation we want. But we're there for a reason or for a purpose. Maybe it's to help us grow. Maybe it's for us to shine a light in a way so others around us can see and learn how to get through those tough times. Or maybe we're there because there's someone in that same situation that needs our help. Like Daniel. We can't find much wrong with Daniel in the book of Daniel, can we? Seems like he was a pretty good all-around guy, yet he went through a difficult time, never got to go back home to Jerusalem that we saw, to Judea. But look what he did for King Nebuchadnezzar. If you were in the class, you'd know what I'm talking about. What a blessing he was. Or Joseph. God took those bad things that were happening to him and worked with it to bring about great things. And he can do that with you and me. Guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and draw near there in verse 1 to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know they are doing evil. We've talked about this where a lot of times when we're in a stressful situation or we're surprised and there's a lot of grief or a lot of emotions going on in our lives, we tend to what? Put on the little blinders, right? And all we can see is what's happening to us right then and right there, and it's woe is me kind of attitude. And so we're looking at ourselves, and we're not thinking about the effect it has on others, or that maybe there's something more here for me to do that I need to be working on because I'm too focused on self. And it's always about that, isn't it? I look at Nebuchadnezzar, and he was a prideful man. But we saw that he became humble, didn't we? I look at Joseph's brothers, and they were prideful men. They wanted things their way, and Joseph was standing in the way. And so they got rid of him because they didn't like his dreams. They didn't like this, or they didn't like that. And put it whatever you want in there. They didn't like him. So they took it upon themselves to take care of it. They didn't like what happened to their sister, which I can understand. She got raped. And so they took it upon themselves, and they killed everyone in Shechem. Arrogance, pride. We read about that a lot in Scripture. And it brings us to a point in life where we begin to focus in on self. And when we do that, and we run into difficulties in life, we're so self-absorbed, it's about us. I think I've been working on this over the last 6 months. I'm thinking about making a series of it, but that's why I'm talking about it tonight, is to think about these surprises that we see all throughout the Bible. And there's a lot of them. And I think those surprises and the idea of arrogance, pride, and self-absorption is a great issue that we're dealing with not only in our country but in our world and cultures all around. I see that infecting our minds and our hearts all around. And as a result, when difficulty comes, when surprises hit, what do? We're looking at self, aren't we? I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it on both sides of the political aisles. I'm seeing it everywhere, even within the churches. It's all about self. Nebuchadnezzar had to learn that lesson in a very hard way. And so I want us to examine ourselves. You know me, I like lists. I like to write things down. I like to put things down because I can read it, and as I'm putting pen to paper, I'm forced to think about it. As I'm examining myself, and I put it down, and I write down everything about myself. What do I think about these things? Why? Why is that important to me? Is it because of me and what I want? Or is it for the betterment of those around me? Why am I doing these things? And so I make my list. And I begin to wonder, what kind of person am I? Am I self-absorbed in some things, or am I humble in others? And I have found I am. I've got some arrogance. We all do. Some pride. And those things, that pride can blind us from the things that God has set before us, those surprises, those difficulties in life, or even the blessings in life. I think some of the greatest blessings in my life, actually, no, I know. The greatest blessings in my life have been the most difficult times in my life. One of the reasons I got baptized into Christ was because I was in a difficult situation between my parents, where I was living. I hated life. And I was down in Memphis, Tennessee, and I told you this part of the story before, where I was down there with my brother Jason in a car. He was a preacher. And I was there because I was pretty much saying goodbye. They didn't know it. I was saying goodbye. I was just going to leave somewhere to another state and never see this family again. That was my goal. I was done with it. And he posed a question to me that struck me as just the strangest, that couldn't be true, and I had to investigate it. That's just my mind. I analyze things. When he told me, because I was going to the Baptist Church of Christ, the Oak Park Baptist congregation, And he said, Chris, you know, the Baptists don't even believe in baptism. I said, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, Jason. They're called Baptists. They do too. Surely they do. I didn't know. I was there for basketball. And so I needed to find out. And that's when I started to actually read the Bible for the first time and actually think about it. The second great blessing in my life, which was a great difficulty in my life, was when I got shipped off to war. I was out of the Army for 2 years. I was done with it. And then they called me. 10 days, Chris, you're going to war. I didn't want to do that. I did not want to do that. And of course, that's where I found Jenny. And then I had 4 kids. Great kids. I love you guys. Blessings. But look what I had to go through to get them. I look at my life and I see the providence of God. Some great, good surprises, some terrible surprises, but persevering through them, what happened? Blessings on the other end. I just had to keep on keeping on and not give up. Where our culture, our world, is really becoming self-absorbed. It needs to see that there's a better way. Where are they going to find that? They're going to find that in you and in me. We have to always be a Christian, even in the darkest of times, when we feel like we ought to lash out and do something just like they do. We need to stop and step back for a moment and ask that question, what would Jesus do? And that is difficult. It's hard. But we need to be ready, and you can only be ready for that if the pride of life is tempered down and your focus is more on Christ rather than on self. We need to guard our steps as we're going to the house of God. We need to recognize that God is not just here. Have you ever heard somebody say, well, I don't hear this much because I am the preacher, but have you ever heard someone say, oh, preacher's here, we got to be careful what we say? Have you ever heard that? No? Well, that's good. I've heard from other people it happens. I've wondered, whenever I walk up to groups of people I know and the conversation just kind of dies. Why do they do that? Do they think that God only hears through my ears? Or we can only have to be a Christian when we're around other Christians? Do we compartmentalize God? Because when we think that way, I only have to be a Christian here or around other Christians, we're compartmentalizing God. But he's everywhere, isn't he? And he knows. Again, back in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 4, it was the watcher that came down to speak when Nebuchadnezzar was making those bold statements. The watcher. What is that? It's a title. Title for one of the heavenly hosts. They're called the watcher. And there's more than one. As we read through Daniel 4, there's many. And do you know what they're doing? Watching. They know. God knows. You know. And so we always have to be on the ready to guard the faith, standing firm and not letting the things of this life, the things in the news or whatever it might be, to persuade us to lash out like the rest of the world and to stand firm. And so we must watch our step and be careful as we move along in this life. It's a difficult road. And it is our job, God expected of us, to be light and salt unto a lost and dying world. The world is no different today than it was during the time of Jesus. When you look at the people in the days of Jesus, you can see self-absorption, very prideful, unwilling to see the truth. They were so prideful and full of themselves, they would not even believe it when they saw a miracle happening right in front of them. That's amazing. And so we often think, boy, if miracles could only happen today. The attitude of the people today is exactly the same attitude of the people back then. It's pride. It's pride. Self-absorption. They're not seeing clearly because they got the blinders on. And everything that happens, whether they're blessings or they're bad, it's all about them. Bad things? Oh, why does it have to happen to me? Why are you doing this to me, God? When there's good things, look at all the good that I've done. And we see that today, don't we? It hasn't changed. Nothing new under the sun. And they will only learn through example. And that's why God sent his son, so that his mind, his heart will be left for us. Here's how to live your life. His spirit. And so we die to self, raise up into a new life, and add it to the one new man, to Christ, to have his way of thinking and his way of reacting to things so that the world can see. Daniel did that for Nebuchadnezzar. And I think it changed his life, moved him in the right direction. And God expects you and me to do the same thing as we go. When Jesus told his disciples to go and make disciples, that word "go" is in the passive, as you go. And that's what Daniel did as he was going along. When he found opportunity, he was wise in understanding the situation and used the right words at the right time in order to put the right ideas into people's minds. And look how it affected not only his life and his friend's life, but the whole world. He wasn't trying to. He was just trying to be a good child of God. Just a cup of cold water, or something refreshing, is all we need to be for people, to show them the kind of life that God has in store for us. And we're the light. Let us think about that as we go about this week and we come in contact with all those in the world and come in contact with the news and the difficulties, to remember that we're going to be hit with all kinds of things. We need to stand fast. Let's think about that.